Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing another really fascinating guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Bobby Reddy, who is the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of a company called Pi Health. They are a health technology and clinical research company. They're committed to empowering life science companies to develop medicines faster and ultimately reach diverse patient populations. Dr. Reddy heads global operations, business development, and commercial activities at the company, ultimately with this mission of driving equal access to innovative medicines and clinical trials for patients around the world. Previously, Dr. Reddy served in leadership positions both at BeiGene, where he was Executive Director of Applied Innovation, which was a really interesting technology incubator in the Office of the Chief Executive Officer, also at AstraZeneca as Head of Oncology Regulatory Science and Innovation, there as a member of the Global Oncology Regulatory Science and Strategy Leadership Team. And prior to these roles in the biopharma space, Dr. Reddy was a faculty of Harvard Medical School and a physician scientist and clinical dermatologist at Mass Gen. He's also an alumnus of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, National Institute of Health Research Scholars Program. Dr. Reddy completed his internal medicine internship at Brigham and Women's Hospital, did dermatology residency at Columbia University Medical Center, melanoma fellowship at Mass Gen, and did his medical degree at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, go Scarlet Knights. Also undergraduate at Villanova, go Wildcats, his bachelor's in biology there, and he still practices, maintains an active clinical practice in the area of dermatology, being board certified there. A lot of cool topics to get into today, a lot of really diverse subjects here. Looking forward to the discussion. Dr. Bobby Reddy, thank you so much for taking time on the show.
Thanks, Ira, for the very warm and generous introduction. And for me, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation to be on this podcast, which Dave introduced me to, and I'm very impressed by the work that you've done and the guests that you've had, and the very engaging and really great discussions that were part of this program. So I'm honored to be here today. Thank you very much.
Awesome having you. Really, really great having you. Before we get into Pi Health and Pi Health Cancer Hospital and a lot of things we're going to be talking about, would love to, as we typically do, start off by handing things over to you two for a little bit. As I typically do, I took a walk through some of your early research, which focused on genetic and immunological factors in melanoma development. You also had some really interesting work there on inflammatory mediators involved in regeneration and other aspects of cancer biology. Take us back a little bit. Talk about yourself. Talk a little bit about your early research interests, what got you into dermatology, what got you into melanoma research. Love to hear the background story.
Yeah, thank you. When I started medical school, I developed a really keen interest in basic science or early stage research. And, my natural inclination was to do cancer research. Cancer research has not only been a professional passion, for me my entire career, but it's also a deeply embedded, personal one as well. I've lost my mother to breast cancer when I was in high school. It was a defining moment in my life where I realized that this I wanted to spend, the rest of my life, doing something in healthcare, but also doing something involved in cancer. And so that interest, took me into medical school, and then it took me into a laboratory where I spent a lot of time, in doing research in both breast cancer. At that, way back, was also did some neuroscience research, and then, as my career, evolved, I got into melanoma, and then, decided to pursue a career as a clinical dermatologist. But the idea of doing something in cancer space, wanting to and impact both cancer patients through being able to provide them with better opportunities, for treatment, to being able to be involved in their care, and ultimately, having, a platform where you could impact both, cancer patients and their families, and give them, a promise, for better lives is always been something that I wanted to do, both as a student, as an academic, as a doctor, and now as an entrepreneur as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting because even before, and we'll get to the incubation of Pi Health in a minute, but looking through some of what you were involved in both at AstraZeneca and Beijing, not traditional stuff, and everything from the early days of studying real world evidence, biomarkers, things like circulating tumor DNA to understand disease, combination therapy regimens, which was from my days back in the industry, always a no-no, very difficult to do in the early days. And then, of course, at Beijing, the broadening, the use of technologies to broaden access to these clinical trials. Talk a little bit about your time in the industry and a little bit of this evolution that you saw. Hey, obviously farm industry based, we're going to develop these drugs and we'll market them. A lot of stuff happens in between, a lot of evolution of these technologies over the last decade and a half. Talk a little about your experiences there, because you truly were involved in some of the transformational activity that's been going on in the industry the last decade.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, although it may not resemble that in years, and it began all the way when I was in medical school, and I developed an interest in cancer research, and really spent a great deal of time understanding the current landscape of cancer treatments at the time, and what are ways that cancer research can make progress in shaping better treatment availability for patients. So my clinical and research focused, leaving medical school and began in residency, was around melanoma, and melanoma, as as many are who are listening to this are likely aware, is a potentially deadly form of skin cancer that, to this day, it really is a tremendous diagnosis that, that patients, suffer through. But what I've seen and had the really good fortune to experience was the dramatic, evolution of melanoma treatment. So when I was a medical student, and it wasn't too long ago in the relative scheme of things, there were only two FDA-approved medicines, for treating metastatic melanoma, which, in summary, if you had metastatic melanoma, your life expectancy at the time was, less than a year. It was about a year to live. And so it was really, a very bad prognosis, and there was not much out there that could meaningfully impact patients, in terms of, overall survival or progression-free survival, which are the kind of the markers that people use to measure drug impacts on the ability for patients to survive. And so these treatments really didn't have much of an impact on those key critical factors. Fast forward, 8 years later, when I was a faculty at Mass General and Harvard Medical School, where I was seeing, patients in the multidisciplinary program and MGH's melanoma and pigmented lesions clinic, the same, patient who had this, really terrible prognosis now, was living in a time where they were benefiting from a flurry of advances in melanoma treatment. And this is targeted therapies, with BRAF and MEK inhibitors, and then combination therapies where you're combining BRAF and MEK inhibitors for certain patients with these mutational drivers. Furthermore, the emergence of immunotherapy, the PD-1 and CTLA-4 therapeutics completely changed the landscape. So now, in a very short period of time, you had several FDA-approved drugs that meaningfully made a difference in survival in melanoma patients. And it's nothing, short of extraordinary. And I witnessing that, through my career progression, early on, I realized that, we were really living in what I like to still believe is the golden age, for, drug development, specifically in oncology, and that, the work that the researchers, the work that industry, and in conjunction with, academia and the important stuff that government agencies like the NIH and FDA are playing in the space was translating into real impact for patients in a profound way. So I really wanted to be in places and working along with people who are doing this sort of stuff, cutting edge, innovative, projects that are driving further the cancer treatment landscape. So that first made me consider opportunities in industry, and the opportunity first came for me at AstraZeneca, where I was recruited at the time to be on the leadership team of their oncology regulatory division, and that's where my co-founder of Pi Health, Jeff Kim, he was the one who recruited. That's where we met, and he's someone that we've had a similar passion to make an impact on healthcare, and specifically in patients with oncology. Jeff, by his background, was a medical oncologist, and previous to coming to industry, was the division director of oncology at the FDA and the deputy director of the Oncology Center of Excellence. So he came from an incredible regulatory background. And together, we were in AstraZeneca, and then subsequently we both, transitioned to Beijing, where, we worked in applied innovation, which, as you mentioned, was a very unique, technology incubator in the office of the CEO, where we had an opportunity to really think of both technological innovations and, things that changed the status quo on this on cancer treatment, and how we can continuously think of not only innovating in cancer treatment, but access to cancer treatment, because that I realized was another tremendous problem, and when I was at Mass General, I was very proud to see that when patients came to an institution like Mass General and the few renowned institutions in that, or in the United States and the world like it, they really have great access to cutting edge research, outstanding clinical care, and they should have a tremendous confidence that their disease will be treated to the best of abilities that are existent. However, that's a very different reality than patients who are in community settings, both in the United States and the world, and people who are in developing countries who are not part of these large academic medical centers or do not have those in their communities. They have historically different access to both innovative drugs and innovative clinical trials. So Jeff and I both realized that this was a space that really, really needed to, help. And how do we get this incredible, revolution that's happening in oncology drug development to as many people as possible? And that led us to really focusing on technology, the sort of technology that both clinical sites and pharmaceutical companies use to do clinical trials. And we found that that was a very fragmented space where there was a lot of point solutions and people who are doing different steps in the process of clinical trials. But that fragmentation would often lead to a great deal of inefficiencies, and it would often be very challenging for places without an existing tremendous infrastructure to participate. So we then had the opportunity to incubate and build this technology platform that spans both clinical sites all the way to biopharma sponsors and is capable of supporting the entire process of a clinical trial end to end, with the idea that we could really make this the process much faster, much more cost effective, and ultimately create data quality that's unparalleled from an industry standpoint. And through this, create bridges where we can bring clinical trials to community settings and developing countries, along with supporting existing clinical trial infrastructure become more efficient. So that was kind of my career. It transitioned to from academia to industry and ultimately to entrepreneurship, where we were able to found Pi Health and really drive this company through that mission.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just for the audience, you incubate what becomes Pi Health at Beijing, and that itself is a cool story. Just because I remember some of the related stories to that back in the day, where you had the drug companies may have their $1 billion products, and there's this $50 million thing they don't do anything with, and a couple guys take it and run with it and create an awesome company. And so you do it from a technology perspective, which is equally cool. What you develop is something called Fix, front end interoperable capture software. There's these two major modules, one for sites called Harmony, one for sponsors called Unity. And I'll let you run with this because aside from taking EHR, electronic health records, some AI magic and everything in between, you create this really cool end-to-end platform for, as you were saying, connecting up sponsors, connecting sites, and ultimately increasing the access. Talk about what Fix is, and a little bit of just let's take us through the world of Fix, and then we'll go into the different examples, both at the Cancer Center and some of what you're doing in some of these other countries. But really cool, out licensing spin out story behind it, which is neat.
Yeah, on that note, we were very fortunate to have the tremendous support of Beijing and Beijing leadership in being able to incubate the company and still support this company as a customer and an investor to this day. So that was a process that was really fun to be part of. We were at Beijing for 4 years, and we recruited a great team to build a technology platform as you mentioned, called Fix. So Fix is an end-to-end clinical trial software platform. At a site level, it does all of the things that a site needs to conduct clinical trials, and in one platform, in a single login. And so this, we built our own EMR, a clinical trial management system, an investigator site file, along with all of the integration plans to connect with sponsor systems for running clinical trials. We work with sites that were in emerging countries or markets where EHRs aren't as embedded in the entire hospital infrastructure, and they're interested in potentially changing EMRs. We offer that, but we can work with any EMR in any place in the world. So we're also integrate with existing EMRs and workflows to provide the remainder of the clinical trial solutions that can benefit that site. And from a sponsor standpoint, all of the technologies that pharmaceutical companies and CROs typically utilize in the clinical trial process, the main components being an EDC, an electronic data capture, sponsor a clinical trial management system, a trial master file, along with an IRT system, which is that handles drug supply. We have that in one platform called Fixed Unity. And the idea is that we could capture data at the sites, and as more sites utilize our site-facing platform, that data is seamlessly transferred, and the sponsor platform has compliant visibility to everything that's going on, and in real time, benefits from the automation along with the efficiencies gained from having a unified platform to do the entire game of the clinical trial. And so we, as a company, are now using this technology platform and working directly with companies across the biopharma space as in kind of an end-to-end, technology-enabled CRO provider. So we're capable of doing trials for companies around the world and really reimagining them with an efficiency, quality, and cost savings that I think are very cutting edge for this industry, and that's something that we're very proud of. Furthermore, we're interested in expanding our technology footprint to sites across the world, and so the Fixed Harmony platform, and along with various other innovations that we've made on site-facing technology, we're proud to say we're expanding that at a tremendous pace, and sites all over the world are giving us great feedback on the benefits that it's having for their clinical trial infrastructure and their patients.
Excellent. And what very interesting part of the story is in addition to the fixed system, the AI, all the the magic that goes into that software alone, you came up with a dual strategy to also build physical infrastructure to additionally help prove now how this model works, and launched, in addition to Pi Health, something known as Pi Health Cancer Hospital in Hyderabad. And really interesting story, which sort of goes back. You published two papers back to back at the end of 2023. One was in the Lancet Regional Health Southeast Asia, entitled "The Landscape of Cancer Clinical Trials in India," talking about how sort of a major misalignment between the cancers being dealt with in India and what was being studied. And then Future Oncology the next month, State of Cancer Care in India and Opportunities for Innovation, talking about, as you're mentioning, patient awareness, inadequate facility, shortage of certain cancer specialists, and so on. Talk a little bit about these two papers and a little bit of the thinking of what went into the creation of the Pi Health Cancer Hospital as part of this strategy.
Yeah. No, I think this is a very important thing that our company has done and continues to invest in, and that is the idea of India as a clinical trial hub, and so India, is frankly has tremendous resources in the technology, the space, and has been an innovator in many ways in terms of how technology companies and IT solutions globally have been built. But in the cancer clinical trial space, there is a huge burden that's largely unmet, and so India has over 1.3 million new cases of cancer annually, and often the availability of clinical trials in oncology is very scarce, and it is just another statistic put out there, like only 2% of global oncology trial sites are located in India, while India accounts for approximately 8% of the global cancer burden. And so that it really illustrates the huge gap. And so we wanted to change that because we fundamentally believe that given India's cancer burden, given its strengths in the technology space, given also its strengths in having a robust healthcare infrastructure where there are a great deal of competent oncologists and that are frankly not only in India, but they're going all over the world to practice. we thought that we could use our technology and create an infrastructure that could really impact the country in the way it does oncology clinical trials. And we strongly believe that India, in the years to come, in a 5 to 10 year span, is going to be one of the leaders of clinical trials globally. So in order to make this a reality, we invested in building a hospital in Hyderabad, which is called Pi Health Cancer Hospital. So during the pandemic, we executed on this project to build a hospital, and this hospital opened in Q4 of 2023, and the hospital is integrated end-to-end with our fixed technology platform, and it's been a tremendous success at an operational level and for patients, and since it's open, we've treated hundreds of patients with cancer, and remarkable success. But also we've had 7 industry-sponsored clinical trials that are available through this hospital. And so patients now in this region are able to get access to clinical trials and innovative medicines they would not have otherwise had if it wasn't for this infrastructure. And the data that is being collected at the hospital at both a patient level, as what I mean is non-clinical trial, patient level, and for clinical trials, is unparalleled quality. And this is it really changes the kind of the prospects of what clinical trials can be in India, to the point where sponsors are attracted by this. They're saying, why are we doing more clinical trials in India, and how do we work with you guys and really bring our medicines to the Indian market and the Indian patient population. So it's something that we're very proud to have incubated and built within our company, but we're also know that this is just the beginning. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of the expansion potential that India has, and so we'd love to continue to grow and have sites all over India use our technology platform and be able to bring global sponsored trials both in oncology and beyond to India.
Yeah, I know. I went to the CDSCO information, and yeah, you have. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting stuff. Everything from biosimilars. I saw a beta thalassemia study in there that's in phase 2A. So not just cancer, but some of the sort of the tangential stuff. I think. I mean, there's a recently approved product too. Can you just say a couple words about that? Because I mean, not all of it's public, and if there's any confidential here, then don't go into it. But if you could just talk, a couple minutes just about sort of the scope of some of the different types of products that are being developed at the hospital.
Yeah, no, I think we are, open to working with companies and bringing all sorts of innovative, products across various therapeutic areas. And so with companies, where they use our sites to do clinical trials, or whether they're using our company as a CRO, and we happen to run their trials in our Indian sites. There's a lot of benefits that we're able to offer these companies through this. I mean, our enrollment and recruitment timelines for clinical trials is outstanding. The quality of the data that and the operations infrastructure is also outstanding, and this makes it a very attractive site and for companies all over the world to do clinical trials with. So we're now doing both clinical trials at the hospital and oncologies, and along with rare diseases, and we're having tremendous success in finding patients that previously would be very difficult to find. And I think largely our technology is built to capture very sort of granular data and make patients who are clinical trial eligible be able to find clinical trials accordingly. So we're able to kind of do the trial matching aspects that I think will lead to great success rates for enrollment, but also the operational infrastructure of this hospital is very unique. I mean, we're focused on clinical trials, and as if we treat every patient as if they're, a person going through the same level of scrutiny and regulation as there'd be on a clinical trial, because we feel, frankly speaking, that every patient deserves that. And that sort of, attention, it produces outstanding results from an operational conduct standpoint for clinical trial infrastructure. And through this, we developed a reputation in that region for a major, clinical trial referrals. So that having that reputation in that community has also helped us.
And along lines of that strategy of sort of delaying, leveling the playing field here, you're active, far beyond India. You have partnerships in the United States, of course, Brazil, Australia, and again, rural sites, community health sites that might not be close to a teaching hospital and so forth. And it's this very important number, which it's kind of shocking. It hasn't moved that much in recent years. There's something only about 5% of all patients that are eligible for some type of clinical trial or seek it out, and that leaves 95% of everyone else out there. I tell the story of my father-in-law recently, got into an awesome clinical study for a antibody drug conjugate, gave him a really nice 2 years of progression-free survival in prostate cancer, but a lot of opportunities here being missed. Talk a little bit about some of the strategies here. Obviously, I guess what you learned in the United States and Brazil and Australia also had different systems, but the same problem ultimately. Walk us through sort of as you internationalize this system beyond India and into all these different health systems. I think it's a really cool story.
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing, your personal family member story. And that's a great story. And our goal for wanting to do this is to have as many patients experience stories like this and have the same optimism. As you mentioned, that data is real, and it's largely unchanged. Only 5% of clinical trial eligible patients ever get to participate. And one of the problems because of that is clinical trials are largely in large AMCs or these tertiary care hospitals, which are often in major cities. But most of the patients are not in those areas, right? For example, in the US, 85% of cancer patients are treated in community settings, and then data has shown that, the average person in those settings has to drive over 2 hours to get to a medical center that has a clinical trial. And these sort of logistics are really prohibitive for a lot of people to participate in clinical trials. Cancer specifically is a very deeply, personal and life-changing diagnosis. So when someone is seen in the community, for a new cancer diagnosis, they really, often get a strong connection with their community physician and the local community, and it means a lot to them. So if their best, case scenario for them is to participate in a clinical trial, and they have to be referred out somewhere else to go. From our experience in talking to a lot of these community sites, and along with some of the patients who are seeing the site, they often don't go because that sentiment and that trust is really it's fragile, and being referred out and having to go somewhere else it's a challenge. So we really believe that in order to change this, you have to bring clinical trials to the community, and have both technology infrastructures and an operational model that benefits community oncologists, community oncology practices, and community oncology patients. So the technology has to help the sites do clinical trials, but also reduce the administrative burden of the staff to ensure that the clinical trials can be done in a way that's a great experience for the site and for the patient. So we took a lot of interest in creating a technology infrastructure and an operational support model for community sites, both in the US and globally. And we're happy to now say that this has worked. We've launched clinical trials in community sites in the US that previously were trial naive. Sites that that have practiced in the U.S. for 40 years. They're excellent, clinical sites. They really want to do clinical trials, but they were just not part of the existing infrastructure on how to do clinical trials. So we work closely with them, and now they're clinical trial eligible, and now they have patients that are enrolled in global phase 3 industry-sponsored clinical trials, and that's one of the biggest successes that we experience as a community, because we, as a company, for oncology patients in the community, because bringing trials to the U.S. community, has always been a part of the vision on what we wanted to do, and having done that, it was very rewarding and only energized us to do more for the U.S. community, and also more in ways for we could take the same success and replicate it in communities across the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And along that lines, I know this is sort of a hybrid area, but you do have out there this, I don't know what the $80 billion or so sort of medical tourism system currently, which is primarily cosmetic procedures and dental care and things like that. Obviously, experimental stuff has been in there, but kind of it's been kind of questionable how properly structured it is. It seems that obviously what you're doing, the fixed system, creates a standardization for it. In other ways, maybe we don't need medical tourism based on the type of systems you're developing. Say a couple words about your perspective on that segment.
I think medical tourism is a nice thing. Any platform where patients have options, and they get to pick treatments and settings that they really like is great. But often medical tourism caters to patients with greater resources and who can afford going abroad to receive treatment and be able to pay out of pocket, who are who have the knowledge and insights and that they find access and do this. We ultimately want to help patients regardless of that. We think often the people who are the greatest challenge in getting access are the people without the financial resources to to pick and choose on how they want to get their care. And our goal is, as a company, our mission is, regardless of what the patient's socioeconomic background is, we want them to have the same experience in a healthcare system, specifically along the clinical trials, the area where our focus of our company is. So we want patients to not necessarily have to go some other places to receive, care, that they think is best for them, and we want them to be able to receive it in a place that they're comfortable in, and is part of their communities. And so that I think will allow the most people to have the access to the best care, and that's an important goal of what we're trying to accomplish. Ultimately, we want everyone to have equal access, and I think that really involves creating infrastructures in the communities where people live.
So clearly, investors are happy with what you're doing. You had a nice $30 million raise just a couple months ago by some pretty preeminent venture funds, as well as BeiGene was involved in that. Bobby, what's coming up next? I mean, what should we be on the lookout for that's public facing for the remainder of 2025? Other initiatives that I did not touch on, and then other conferences, talks, other things that you may be up to where we can meet you, listen to you. Anything I missed while we have you today, please.
Yeah, just a small clarification. We completed our Series A, fundraising round in March of 2024, and just shy of 40 million, and we announced on Pi Day, March 14th, which it's a memorable part of our company experience. But yeah, since now we're kind of a year out from there, and I think we're very happy with the progress that we made as a company. And now we're working with more, pharmaceutical companies and bringing important clinical trials, to patients all over the world. And that is, it's a never-ending, kind of fight and mission. So we're still actively, pushing to expand our footprint of sites around the world, where we're this in 2025, we anticipate having sites in Europe and along with China as part of our global site network, and we're excited to see that. And we're also looking forward to doing more partnerships with biopharma organizations across many therapeutic areas to help support their clinical trials and bring it to patients all over the world.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, again, as you mentioned at the beginning, we are at this amazing golden era of a lot of therapeutic areas, but oncology definitely. We still have this 5% figure, which is kind of awful, and the fact that you're bringing it together and trying to solve problems on both ends is very admirable. And I love the model. I look forward to continue to follow you and watch it grow. But just really impressive what you've been able to put together here in a very short period of time. So I take my hat off to you. But really great story. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Dr. Bobby Reddy, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder, Pi Health, doing really amazing work to drive equal access to innovative medicine and clinical trials for patients everywhere around the world. Bobby, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while today about what you've been up to. Obviously, thank you for everything you do for increasing this access in this really important era. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for literally billions of patients out there via what you're doing. It's a really awesome model, great story, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hira, for inviting me today to be able to share this, and really appreciate this feedback. We wouldn't be able to do this without having a great team of people in this company, and the engineers, the operational folks, the people who are working in the hospital and seeing patients. We're surrounded by a lot of passionate people at Pi Health who really are behind this mission, and they're largely responsible for where we've gone and how successful we've become thus far. But we're equally driven to continue to expand on our mission and do more for patients around the world. So, really appreciate you, having me on the show and allowing me to share our story. And thank you very much.
Yeah, it was great having you, and I really do look forward to continue to watch it and really wish you the best with it. So really awesome. Great having you.
Thank you.